Y finalmente quisiéramos preguntarte qué te encuentras investigando en estos momentos, en qué consisten tus trabajos en esta época de tu vida, qué es lo siguiente que vamos a escuchar. Veo que esta oficina está llena de muchísimos libros, papers, mucho trabajo y cuéntanos un poco de esto.
So the research that I've done over the last 10 years has led to some really remarkable discoveries about the origin of humans, and some of the research that I have in review that is not yet published, but that follows from my book. So my book makes testable predictions. One of the predictions that I made was humans should have within themselves the history of civilization written in their DNA. And one of the ways to see that is, and one of the things that DNA records is the history of population growth. So we know from archaeology, we know from the census that the Romans took back around the time of Christ. We know from the Chinese empires, the censuses they took of their people. We have a rough idea of how many people were there 1000 BC, 500 BC, 1 AD, 500 AD, and so forth. And history goes like this and then shoots up at the end. There's been a massive population growth of people in the globe the last few hundred years. You should be able to see that in DNA, given the discoveries I've made about the human population. And the discoveries so far point towards the human population arising just a few thousand years ago, which means then you should be able to see the history of civilization. And that's what I think we've discovered. We've looked at the male inherited DNA, the Y chromosome, and you can see that every generation there's changes that happen. This is taken from the mainstream literature. And you can also see that the history of population growth is recorded. You shouldn't see this if the history of humanity goes back hundreds of thousands of years. But the fact that I can see exactly like we expect, flat line, then it shoots up the last few hundred years. We've got two big smoking guns that the history of humanity is recent and only goes back a few thousand years. And this opens up really exciting new fields of science, whole new questions. It has the possibility to rewrite history, or I should say to resurrect lost history. So many of the big questions for me growing up were, what happened before Columbus came? I learned virtually nothing about the Americas before Columbus arrived. This now opens up that mystery, and it has some really surprising answers. What about the history of the rest of the globe? What about sub-Saharan Africa? What about Central Asia? There's many holes in my own thinking about these regions of the globe, and there are aspects of history that we thought we knew that are now being rewritten. So one of the things I'm discovering more and more in this research is the political history of the globe is sometimes very different from the history of people. So for example, Europe. I think of European history as a British Empire, there's France, there's Germany, there's these different language groups. And you might expect genetics to reflect that there's a genetic lineage. You might expect a Greek lineage that goes back to the 500 BC era, something like that. You might expect a Roman lineage. You don't see that. Everyone's much more related than we think. So for Europeans who have undergone a massive increase in population size since 1400 AD, much of Europe has a common ancestor around that time. You don't see an English lineage, a German lineage. You see them all joined on a common family tree about 1400. So these are just some of the things that are emerging from the research that I'm doing. It's resurrecting lost history. It rewrites how we think about ourselves. I think of myself with a German mother and an American father. Oh, I'm half German. DNA is rewriting what it means to be a European, to be an African, to be an Asian, to be a Native American. All these things we've taken for granted are being rewritten by DNA. So there's so much that flows out of it, and this is all in line with the type of science that Darwin was doing. Darwin tried to found a question, he tried to identify the hypotheses that tried to explain it, and then he did tests to disprove hypotheses. We're continuing exactly in that path, except we're considering all the modern hypotheses and following the evidence where it leads, and it's really exciting.
Nathaniel, gracias por esta oportunidad, por el tiempo que nos has brindado. Estamos emocionados, expectantes de la conferencia Y queremos invitar a las personas en Colombia para que puedan unirse, para que sean parte y aprovechen este tema tan relevante y sobre todo con un expositor tan destacado como Nathaniel, un científico de esta calidad humana y científica. Entonces nos veremos en septiembre. Nathaniel, gracias.